Welcome back to the Breakaway USA podcast. I'm joined by Fabian Garcia and Speechless with Kev, and we have a special guest, Austin Smith, Representative Austin Smith from the great state of Arizona. He is a legend in Arizona politics. He's a former YR chair for Arizona, as well as a brand new state rep. He also has been intimately involved with Turning Point. We're going to get into a little bit more of that conversation, but he's a stud, and we're excited to have him on. So welcome to the program, Austin.
Well, your viewership's about to go down now because you talked me up so much, and so next time I screw up, I'm not in a good spot. But no, it's good to be with you guys. Gentry's a patriot. Got to know him pretty well over the last year or so, and Kev, it's been a while. It's been what, 4 years now? I mean, it's been a while, and now I get to meet Fabian, so I'm just happy to be with you guys. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there's actually an interesting story about how Austin and Kevin met.
Yes. Okay. So I don't know how much you remember. I know you meet a lot of people this way, Austin, but it had a profound impact on me. And so back in 2019, it was the Student Action Summit with Turning Point USA. It was my first Turning Point event ever. And somebody told me I had to come up and meet you. And it was when you were doing work with Action, when it was doing the Students for Trump stuff back then. And somebody was like, you should go up. You should go check it out. I was just starting my Turning Point chapter. And you had told me at that point, you were like, man, if you're starting a Turning Point chapter, you should start a Students for Trump chapter. And I was like, I don't know, man. It's a lot of work to just get this USA chapter going. And I was very hesitant. And you were like, and I felt like you were a little disappointed in me that I wasn't like all gung ho on it. And I feel bad now because looking back, I totally could have done it. I ended up starting a Students for Trump chapter later. But at the time, I was so hesitant, and I'll never forget it because you were so motivating. And every student that came up to you, you were like, "You can do this. We're going to help you, and we're going to get it going." And it was before you were a state rep. It was before you've ascended to the point of success that you already have, and before you even saw where you're going. And so to know you from that point and see where you are now, that motivates me so much because I know how far I've come in that time, and you've far excelled even past that. So. It means a lot to me, man, to still be kind of friends in a working relationship and see all that growth.
Well, I appreciate it, man, because if you didn't start a Students for Trump chapter, Trump definitely probably would have lost that state that you were living in. So it would have been your fault. But
I'm from Illinois, man. Trump's losing no matter what here. So.
No, that's awesome. I love stories like that. You at least in this realm, and I call it like this industry now in politics because it has become an industry, and everybody talks about the issues and the politics side of things, but the vast majority of it all, it is really just a social science. Mm-hmm. Social science, it's creating relationships. Nobody wants to work or follow somebody that is a jerk, doesn't have vision, isn't nice and kind. This movement is about addition. And there's three things that I think that are really important to the conservative movement, and it's what we try to embody at Turning Point Action. And that first one is the grassroots humility aspect of it. Movement before me. The movement is much greater than I am. We're trying to save the country. I got to put my personal things aside, and we need everybody to be a part of it. We have to be cheerful warriors. Nobody wants to start a Students for Trump chapter if they were like a mean old hag and they weren't inspiring or they weren't, trying to get people hyped up and organized to do something. And so I remember when you did come up and, it was like drinking water with a fire hose, trying to get a lot of people to start Students for Trump chapters. But you were one of the 300. You were one of the 300 Students for Trump chapters that we had in 2019, 2020. And so you were a big part of that. You were one of the very first. And that's pretty cool. Nobody's ever done that before, and you're one of those guys.
Well, we needed to get a fight going, and I saw it, and it was because of people like you. It was Brett Galashevsky, too, who does amazing work, and it was just the great team that's really been cultivated through Turning Point Action that I know that you've played a pivotal role in. So,
yeah, Brett's our legacy field enterprise director now. I actually hired Brett not too long after that Turning Point USA Student Action Summit when we were just starting Students for Trump. So, Brett was one of the first people I hired. Now that I moved over, we'll talk more about Chase the Vote, but Brett now runs the position that I was in. And so Brett was one of those very first people that started out as an entry-level employee as a field rep, became a field manager, and now he's a director, and he's one of those success stories.
And there's a lot of those. And that's the thing that's great about this movement is upward mobility is more than attainable for anybody who's willing to put the work in. So
that's right.
And Austin, for us other people who have just met you, and clearly know that you're awesome, from Kevin and Gentry, but can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do over at Turning Point, what Turning Point Action is, for any of the listeners who may not even know what Turning Point is? We'll get them acclimated very quickly.
Right. So some folks are probably familiar with Turning Point USA. That's the large student movement. That's the 501c3 nonprofit that doesn't advocate for the election or defeat of candidates. They're strictly educational, strictly nonpartisan. They advocate on issues, not, for candidates or the politics of it. At Turning Point Action, we're a 501c4, which is also considered a nonprofit, but you can't donate to a 501c4 and get a tax break. But what we can do at a 501c4 is advocate for the election or defeat of candidates. So like Kevin brought up, in 2019, 2020, Students for Trump was a project of Turning Point Action. The Trump campaign did not have an official youth arm of that campaign. So President Trump pretty much delegated that responsibilities to Charlie and came to us and said, you guys are going to run our youth outreach coalitions, our get out the vote efforts. And so we advocated, for President Trump on a collegiate level and for, 18 to 35-year-old voters across the country in the battleground states. So at the C4, what I oversee, what I helped start in 2019, when I started at Turning Point USA, that was in 2016, at very infant stages, where we didn't have really that big of a presence outside of the Midwest. We had stuff in California, we had some things in Texas, but there really wasn't a whole lot going on out West. And so Tyler Boyer, who was the COO at the time, is now the COO of Turning Point Action. We launched the Campus Victory Project, where we recruit students that are conservative to run for leadership on their college campuses. And so this was 2016, and we brought Turning Point USA out to Arizona in our crappy little Mesa, Arizona office, where we had homeless people outside, there was druggies outside, there was homeless people going to the bathroom outside. It was in a really rough part of town of Mesa, and it was essentially like a little startup company at the time. And Turning Point was headquartered in Illinois, Lamont, Illinois, where Charlie's from, and all the administrative staff was there. Well, Charlie's gone, 340 something days a year, and why would we have a conservative juggernaut organization that's growing in a liberal state, right? It's not welcoming. It's not a smart environment to be in. So me, Tyler, and a couple other people convinced Charlie to pick up the headquarters in Lamont and bring it out to Arizona, Arizona's next great battleground state. And we knew even then, back in like 2017, 2018, we're like, the fight is going to come to Arizona next election cycle and so on after that. And so we picked up Turning Point, moved it to Arizona. And about 2019, I got approached I'm doing my job, my regular, thing in the conservative movement. And Tyler approaches me and was like, hey, what do you know about a 501c4? And I was like, I have no idea what that is. He's like, well, we're going to start and run Students for Trump. And I'm like, that's great. Where's the punchline? Like, what am I missing? Like, what's going on? He's like, well, we have to build all this stuff for a C4. I didn't know one thing about 501c4s and how all that operates with federal elections commissions. And so this was the spring of 2019. And by that time, I love that Step Brothers mug, by the way. That's awesome.
Thank you.
But so we started Turning Point Action in the summer of 2019, and we did our Students for Trump launch party in Vegas. I think it was the Palms Hotel in August of 2019. And that's been us ever since. And now Turning Point Action has kind of, rolled into a political juggernaut. A lot of people are talking about this is what the RNC should be doing. And what we've replicated at Turning Point Action in essentially 4 years, coming up on 5 years this summer, Turning Point USA, it took them over 10 years to build. Well, we did it in 4 years at Turning Point Action. And so that's a lot of testament to the people that we hired and the vision and the company culture. And Turning Point Action is starting to get a lot larger now because of just our company culture and what we truly believe in. And, you got to walk the walk a little bit, and that's what we believe.
Absolutely. I can't even speak highly enough about Turning Point and just the ability to cultivate such grassroots in every facet of youth culture. I mean, it started off as Austin, and like 30 miles north of where I grew up in Illinois with Charlie and Bill Montgomery, a few others, and figuring and in a garage essentially.
Yeah.
And has now grown into not only being the educational wing of conservatism with USA, but you have the political wing of action. We have faith. We have Campus Victory Project, and it's continuously growing. We're now in high schools. When I started in Turning Point USA, the idea of being in high schools was still kind of a pipe dream, and now here we are in thousands and thousands of campuses. And I say we, I'm not even the leader of a chapter or anything anymore, but you guys even have an alumni wing now. So
yeah,
it's continuously growing. There's nothing ever really been like it. You could maybe try to say YAF at one point, but that is kind of its own small following. You're right. It's a juggernaut in every facet, and anybody, I recommend everybody getting involved in some way.
What's pretty cool about just the history and the genesis of where Turning Point started, and some of you might know like who Foster Friess was, a very successful conservative business.
Oh, I think he froze. Did he freeze for you guys?
Yes, he did. I was worried it was me. So
yeah.
No. There we went. Now we're back.
Okay.
Foster
Friess.
Yeah. So yeah, Foster Friess. Charlie was at the Republican National Convention with Bill Montgomery, and he ran into Foster Friess and kind of gave him essentially an elevator pitch, right? Like literally outside of an elevator at the RNC. And he gave him the elevator pitch on what he was trying to do. And right then, Foster Friess wrote a $10,000 check to Charlie, and that was the seed money.
Yep.
And now, look at a multi-million-dollar C4, multi-million-dollar C3, hundreds of employees.
Is it the same Foster Friess that has like the ice cream shops and all that?
No.
Oh, okay. No, because there's a famous one here in
Yeah.
Okay, so I wasn't sure if it was the same.
Foster would always say, I got to know Foster pretty well before he passed away, and he's like, yeah, I'm Foster Friess like the beer, the Friess beer. That's how you spell my name. That was Foster Friess. But yeah, I mean, like it turned into it's turned into a massive movement that's bigger than what we ever thought it would have been when we first started it. And Charlie started 2012ish, but in 2016 when we were still in that infant stages, now it's just multiple avenues of what we're doing between the C4. There's Turning Point PAC. They have the Mount Vernon Project where we recruit people to run for the RNC. You've got the Campus Victory Project, which is its own, because of the success that it had under Turning Point USA, it's its own 501c3 now with its own network, with its own stuff. Yeah. And then Turning Point Faith and the Turning Point Academy. So it's turned into a whole plethora of what, the movement is supposed to be. And for us, it's always been like, we want to expand. It's like, but Turning Point is one of like, if you've ever been to one of the conferences, especially like Student Action Summit or at America Fest, we're one of the only organizations that can bring a wide swath of speakers and people that are from all different spectrums of the conservative movement. You'll have more MAGA type people, you'll have constitutional conservatives, you'll have more libertarian, liberty-minded people all under one roof for a lot of these conferences. And that's truly what we believe, right? No territorial disputes. It's all about saving the country. And I think that's where a lot of the success has come from in the last decade. I mean, going on 13 years now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Austin, I have a question for you. Since the time where this woke madness has really taken hold of the country, or sections of it at least, have you seen, especially because you're literally on the ground floor every day, have you seen young people coming out more and more enthusiastically about the conservative movement than you did maybe like 2018, 2019?
Oh, absolutely. I think part of it, just because COVID changed everything, right? Like the entire country got turned upside down. A lot of people have different thoughts and ideas about what they originally knew to be true, turned out not being that way. And I saw a poll that was out, it's been a while ago, but young men are becoming much more conservative than they have in like the last 50 years. And I think that's a lot of just what's been culturally shoved down people's throats. And so the response is like, well, what did you expect when you say like, because you're a white straight male or you're just a straight male that you're oppressive, that you shouldn't live? I'm like, well, yeah, the counter to that is going to be exactly opposite of what you want. And so that's kind of where we're at right now, is seeing a lot more young people turn to the conservative side. I think of it, Andrew Breitbart said it best: politics flows downstream from culture. And that's 100% true. I mean, Donald Trump is a perfect example of the culture war president, right? And that's why he's so popular amongst Greek students on college campuses. That's why he's so popular amongst young men who are more rebellious. I mean, that's just like what happens when you lean into the cultural issues like that. When you have somebody that goes against the grain on those issues, like Donald Trump did, there's a lot more young people, and he's actually dominating with young men, dominating with young conservative men, because inherently we want to be alpha. We want to be strong-willed men. What's just in our DNA. And so the cultural rot that we've been experiencing has been shoved down people's throats. Definitely different from 2018 to today, much more conservative.
So that brings up another question I have, and just spitballing here. It seems like a lot of what the Democrats try to do is decrease not only masculinity, but also just any separation between the genders, period. Why do you think that is? What's their goal? Why do they want that?
I don't know. I'm not a liberal. I couldn't tell you. But I mean, but what's crazy to me is, like, so they push this stuff, right? Like abortion up until birth, all gay marriage. We don't want people getting married. And I was like, well, think of long term here. You guys aren't going to be reproducing. You're not going to have an army anymore. So I'm like, I don't know what their whole end game is here.
Well, they ship illegals in. That's what they're doing now, is they ship illegals in, and then
ship illegals in is like, but there's not going to be any bloodline for them. I don't know what they're trying to do. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Plus, the kids of immigrants, as far as I know, Cubans, because I'm my parents are from Cuba, they turn Republican. So, I mean, they're importing people, but I don't see any longevity in this like nihilistic ideology, which just says cut off your genitals, only have sex with the same sex, so you can't have babies, and don't reproduce. It's the weirdest thing. It's like for longevity's sake, wouldn't you want your people to stay around so they can help the subsequent generations of whatever idiocracy that they're pushing?
Right.
And there's the other thing is like the old Republican dogma, right, was, oh, we don't have to worry about them on college campuses because they're liberal. When they get older and start paying taxes, they're going to be conservative. Well, that turned out not to be true, because there's millennials who came out of college, and then some of the Gen Zers and the Gen Xers that came out of college, and they're still liberal, or they got more liberal because they were on college campuses, and the culture just told them that they had to be liberal. What I think is really unique about this new conservative movement among guys our age is that we go to the places that we're not supposed to be. We go to the venues or the avenues where traditionally conservative thought and ideas aren't necessarily respected. I mean, I don't know if you guys paid attention, like what's going on in Arizona, like at Arizona State University, the free speech issues that they've had there, and the stuff that I've been working on in the legislature is that, you have to be engaged on these issues. You can't just let, the left run roughshod over these cultural issues like getting married and having a family and being an alpha male. Because if somebody gets exposed to that stuff, their mind changes, because they've never been exposed to that right thinking. I truly believe, like, when you present like honesty and the truth to people, good people come around to it, whether they've been led astray or not. And I think that's why you're starting to see the movement grow more, and young men will become more conservative.
Well, because it just makes more sense. Like the progressives, and I always ask this question, like, what are they progressing to? Like, I don't think they're progressing towards anything except for oblivion. But on the other side, on our side, what we're progressing towards is like family and having grandkids and teaching them how to live and just how to be great people, and the truth, right? The truth sets people free. So.
Absolutely. Well, Austin, you started talking a little bit about some of the cultural stuff you're working on in Arizona. I know there's some other work that you've been doing down there that we're looking at, or that we'd hope we could start seeing nationally. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So right now I'm in my second session as a freshman in the Arizona Legislature. I ran in 2022, got elected. And so I'm a member of the Arizona Freedom Caucus. A lot of people are familiar with the big House Freedom Caucus in DC. Well, now we have state network freedom caucuses. We're all under one same umbrella. So like the Freedom Caucus guys you see in DC, we're all considered like brothers together, guys in arms with the state Freedom Caucus level. So, and I'm pretty lucky that I've got Freedom Caucus guys in Arizona that are in DC, like Andy Biggs, Paul Gosar, and Eli Crane, who I think are phenomenal guys. And so I've got to kind of watch them a little bit on where they take stances on some of these issues and how they've been successful at it, right? Like holding the line on some things. And one thing about Arizona is like having a Democrat governor, being a swing state, there is so many issues culturally that we can lean into and move the needle. Last year, we had a bunch of different bills that we sponsored through the Freedom Caucus and other conservative members on, like, keeping men out of women's sports, having gender role bathrooms, keeping men out of the women's locker room, keeping pornography, softcore porn out of public library books, things of that nature that are very culturally conservative, right? And just doing the right thing. And I went to a meeting last or 2 weeks ago where we got some polling, and it showed that during that legislative session with all of us House Republicans, when we leaned into those cultural issues, our approval ratings went up while the Democrats went down for the first time in the history of Arizona. Nobody could give a crap about or cares or knows who their state representative or who their state senator are. Nobody just knows. They're just politically detached from that. Not a lot of people know that. And it showed like when we lean into these issues, right, where they go, these are divisive issues. I'm like, no, these are actually sometimes kitchen table issues, right? It's like, would you feel comfortable as a dad with your daughter sharing the same locker room as an adult male with male genitalia?
Yep.
No, you would not. And for some reason, the left thinks that this is the issue for the hill to die on. When we take the stand and say, no, we don't want your daughter exposed to male genitalia in the bathroom while she's in grade school and high school, that's pretty alarming. That, you know, that's kind of where the country's at right now, but we're winning on those issues, and the polls show that we are. And so when you lean into those cultural issues, you start to move that Overton window a little bit. You're moving that conversation where, you know, it is the third rail of politics to not touch, you know, some of these cultural issues. Like, but the opposite is actually true. When you do touch them and you lean into them, that's one of them. And so I worked on a lot of bills last year, co-sponsored them to protect women in sports. Another big one that I'm working on this year. And so a lot of people are familiar in the World Economic Forum and the global health organizations about like 15-minute cities, don't eat meat. You have to, like, we're going to track all the vehicle mileage on your car. Stakeholder capitalism, where like everybody's an owner of the business and there's no individual property rights, so on and so forth. The list just goes on and on and on and on. And so what is happening is like, it's not really the states that are doing it. It's like all these cities and these towns and these local governments that are attending these World Economic Forum conferences or these stakeholder group Marxism conferences, everything that's like left of Lenin, that's like seriously liberal. And so the cities are getting involved in these conferences and taking their policies and like paying dues to be a part of these organizations and bringing it back to your city. And so I wrote a bill this year to hopefully we'll send to the ballot that's like, you cannot use public money to be a part of these organizations that advocate for all of that stuff that they want at the World Economic Forum. And they have lost their freaking mind over it because we're over the target on this issue, that you're not going to use taxpayer money to ban the consumption of meat in your city. You're not going to tell people that they can't drive their cars a certain time of day in the city. You're not going to, you know, ban air travel certain times of the day or certain times of the year out of your city. You're not going to do stuff like that with taxpayer funded money. If you want to go spend your own dime and try to advocate for these policies, have fun, but you're not going to use taxpayer money for it. And so that's like, I think some people think of it's a political issue. Like, no, it's a cultural issue because of the climate change alarmists, that I call them the climate change cult, and all of these organizations that they're advocating for you to just give up your freedom, give us some more money, we'll fix the climate, which is freaking bonkers in my opinion. And
yeah,
we have to
unless
stop
you're going to stop the sun, it's not going to work.
No.
The only way you can change the climate is block the sun out.
I'm like, if I give up more of my freedom and pay more money, the weather's just going to get better. I'm like, what? It's going to get gooder. I'm like, what are you talking about?
It's going to get gooder. Well, isn't Arizona like a huge ranching state? So
Yeah.
if they're advocating to stop eating meat, then that's going to basically destroy that whole industry, right?
Right. And they don't even understand like the long-term effects of that stuff. And so everybody, you know, likes a good steak, a hamburger. But what they don't is like, do you have like a leather wallet? Do you have a leather pair of shoes? Do you have like a leather jacket? Do you have like any, like most things like most people don't know that are like, because I come from an ag background, most Americans are 3 to 4 generations removed from production agriculture. So they don't understand like a simple glass of milk, that didn't happen overnight. That was like, there was a seed planted in the ground, that seed was taken care of, it became a crop, it was stored, it was cut up, it was fed to livestock, and that cow produced milk. That just does not happen overnight. That is like a several month long process. And so they figure like, well, if we just take this away, well, the climate will be gooder. I'm like, that no, you don't understand like the long-term economic effects or the, that long-term health effects and stuff like that. You guys have probably seen like the calls for like, we're going to eat bugs. That's just somehow going to make us healthier and it's going to fix the climate. I'm like, you guys are off your freaking rockers that this is somehow going to save the planet. Like, no, I'm not eating like bugs for dinner. I'm not doing it.
Ever. So at Seattle Mariners games, they have this thing where they're trying to get people to eat crickets, right? And so at at the games, I tried it and it wasn't bad, but it wouldn't have been my first choice. Like I wouldn't have picked that over a steak.
You probably
Right.
wouldn't be eating it 3 times a day.
No, absolutely not. I don't know.
Well,
There's
and then
also a lot
there's
of
even
talk
this.
that their bodies are really harmful for humans to eat. Like the
Oh,
exterior
really?
of their bodies are not meant for human consumption.
Right.
And I mean, not even talking about any long-term effects. But one point to go along with what you were saying, Austin, is that one thing that these leftist crazies don't consider is that the fact that, let's say they get their way and they shut down all farming, whatever, all agriculture, or as much as they need to save the planet, and it doesn't work. And by that time, in order to restart industries, especially one that big, it would be nearly impossible, because not only do you have to train a whole generation of people on something that they've never done before, who's going to teach them? And
Mhm.
you know, in Russia, there's a big thing about how they keep the oil wells basically lit all through winter, even if there's nothing, rather, even if they're not working on it, because if those freeze, it can take 10 years to unfreeze. So they just literally keep it going, because they know once it stops, it's going to be extremely hard to get back online. And I feel like this is the same route that these Marxists, neo-Marxists, want to go down.
And they don't even understand that, like, I mean, just from my generation's perspective, coming from agriculture, it's getting harder and harder to maintain that family farm. There's like this big, assumption that like we're all run by these factory farms. I'm like, that's really less than 1% of America's food production. 99% of it all comes from family farms and family ranches. If you take out a significant chunk of that, because like we talk about like labor shortages, nobody can afford to run these farms and ranches anymore because the government has come in, raised property taxes, fuel costs too much. It's just way too much overhead, and they're operating usually in the red. They're risking a lot of capital. They're risking credit. And so when grandpa dies or the dad dies or retired, the kids don't even have enough capital for themselves to jump in, or credit enough to jump in and build that. And that's all by design. They don't want us to be self-sufficient. And as we've, like I said, most generations, 3 to 4 generations removed from production agriculture, where you get your food, or even knowing how to grow your own food. That's a significant national security crisis. And that's another reason, like we're talking about, the masculinity aspect of it. They don't want us to eat red meat, because red meat helps you produce testosterone. It's actually good for men to eat meat, because we are carnivorous creatures. We're aggressive creatures. We have to have sustenance, and meat's one of those things. You want to replace that with a cricket, with a bug? No, society is going to collapse. That's just not going to work.
Yeah, one quick point about that. As you were mentioning that, I remember reading a story that says that all these all the vehicles that are used to harvest, they're all now, you have to rent the software or something from it, so you don't even own that. And without that, it's essentially just a heap of junk, a heap of metal. So it goes along to the WEF, so you own nothing and be happy, where even if you own the actual vehicle, it doesn't do anything, because you need the technology behind it that connects to the internet, and they own that entire connection. Poor farmers, man.
No, it's a tough lifestyle. I mean, I grew up working on the ranches here in Arizona. I've grown my own alfalfa before. I've worked at a dairy farm. It is an exceptionally tough life. And these are like the salt of the earth people that make our country go around. And they've gone through a lot in the last 20, 30 years. It's gotten harder and harder to farm. People talk about, what happened during COVID and supply chain shortages. And that wasn't the results of the farmers. It was because there was so much demand, but they represent like less than 1% of our population. And they feed the entire country. They ship a lot of products overseas. A lot of the produce and stuff that you buy right there in your grocery store, most of the time comes from a local farm or a neighboring state. And so it's not a very big industry. And you take those people out and they can't self-sustain anymore. And like you were mentioning, Fabian, is that nobody's going to know what to do. Nobody's going to know how to farm. Nobody's going to know how to ranch. Most people don't even know how to fire a gun to shoot a deer if they had to, or a squirrel or something. Like, you want to talk about madness in the streets? Food security is national security. And you take that chunk out, you think it's bad now, just wait till people can't go buy a glass or a gallon of milk anymore. Then we're in really big trouble.
Jeez.
Yeah.
You're spot on. So you were just telling us about another bill, though, before we started, and I wanted you to finish that thought on election integrity in Arizona. It sounded like that was a huge win.
Yeah, so one of the reasons I ran for the legislature was because of election integrity. Being here in Arizona, in 2020, that was really a kick in the nuts of how they stole it from us, and it was kind of right in front of our eyes legally. And you want to talk about fraud, and you want to talk about manipulation. We know that the left and these much larger organizations are manipulating the outcome of elections. There's no denying that. But you have to play kind of the cards that you've been dealt. And so after 2020, Republicans controlled the state house, the state senate, and the governorship. Doug Ducey was governor at the time. They didn't get a lot of significant election integrity reforms. The one that I can think of that was the biggest that they got back then was banning the Zuckerbucks from Arizona. That they can't donate the counties that facilitate the election. They can't take Zuckerbucks for drop boxes, for mass mailing of ballots, for research, for marketing to update your voter registration. You can't work with the governments on that. And so that was pretty much the only significant 2020 after 2020 election reform. 2022 happens. Machine tabulators go down on election day in Arizona. It screws Kari Lake over. It screws Abe Hamadeh over. We just got our asses kicked. They wiped the floor with us with the system that is in place. We were so unorganized and underfinanced compared to them that they just wiped the floor with us on it. And so one of the reasons why Kari Lake goes to court and Abe Hamadeh goes to court and these other candidates is because they're trying to find standing to sue in court. That you might have seen the videos of those guys in Maricopa County just clicking through the signatures really fast. Well, technically that's illegal, that they have to take time to, certify those signatures, but we have nothing in state statute that says that has to be the law. And so when Kari Lake goes to court and they show them that, the judge is like, well, you know what? You're probably right, but there's nothing in laws that says that they're breaking it. And so what we did this year, Representative Alex Calden, who's also in the Freedom Caucus with me, I was with him today. He calls himself the second best election integrity conservative lawyer in Arizona because there's one in front of him that's really good too. But so I'm on the elections committee with him. We're both in the Freedom Caucus together. In the 2023 legislative session, he wrote the bill that would have just codified into law when Katie Hobbs, when she was Secretary of State, the procedures manual on how signatures are supposed to be, observed and adjudicated and cured. He wrote a bill that was her literal election procedures manual, and she vetoed it. So fast forward to 2020, end of 2023, beginning of 2024. Because Congress did the reform of the Electoral Count Act, it changed a bunch of dates on how we have to send our electors and how we certify election results in Arizona. And so the counties pretty much manufactured this crisis where they said, if you guys don't fix this election problem with how we send out Uvacava ballots, which means it's military and overseas voters, which has to be out by 2 months before the general election date, faster than everybody else, because they have to obviously send them to Jordan and other places where our military are from Arizona. And so what we did is we said, okay, but in order to get that done, you guys need to come help us on significant election integrity reforms. So we put into that bill to move up the date for them to be able to send out the Uvacava stuff, military overseas voters. We took Katie Hobbs' exact words in 2020, how we're supposed to do signature verification law when she was Secretary of State. We put that in a bill. Another thing what happened in 2022 was when Abe Hamadeh was running for Attorney General, he only lost by a couple hundred votes. That's because the Democrats were getting real-time data from their nonprofits, their NGOs, backdoor data from the counties to go to Democrat voters and cure their signatures. So the signature that they sent in didn't match what was in the data when they have to count their ballots. So they were going real time to people's doors during early voting and saying, hi, your signature is not cured. You need to call in or sign this affidavit that that's who you say you are, so your signature will be cured and counted, because they can't count the votes for your signature unless your signature has been cured, has been approved, and that's what they have on file.
Right.
So I was like, well, I think it would be a good idea if in real time there is Republican ballots and Democrat ballots that need to be cured. Every 12 hours, the county recorder must publicly put on their websites so the counties can have available who needs their signature cured with their address. You can just go in and get it. So in real time, when somebody's signature is not matching up what's on file, we can be assembled and organized. If you live in this legislative district in this county, you're responsible. You're a precinct committeeman. You got to go to that guy's house and get their signature cured. We can do that in real time. And so we put that in there. The other thing that was significant that we put in there is you guys probably saw in 2022 why it took so long to count the ballots in Arizona. Mm-hmm. Well, what happens is there's a lot of people who do have mail-in ballots, but they didn't feel comfortable mailing it in. So they went to the voting locations on election day and dropped them off. Well, what happens there is those votes can't be counted there. they have to go into its own specific box, and then it's taken to one central tabulation center, and there the signatures have to be matched what's on the file. That's why it takes so long. That took 24 days in 2022 for that to happen. And so what this bill does, it says when you show up with your mail-in ballot, you provide your ID and your vote will be counted right there. Rather than having it wait for several days, up to 24 days almost for it to be counted, you show your ID right there with your ballot. You can't drop off multiple ones unless it's somebody in your family, and they can look you up on the voter rolls and see who's living in this house. So you have to present your ID with your mail-in ballot if you're dropping it off. We got 57 people in the legislature, 50 or 55 or 50, whatever it was. We got Republicans and Democrats. So the Democrats manufactured the crisis of like, oh, we're not going to be able to send out the ballots on time because of the Republicans a couple years ago did the recount stuff and it changed everything. We're like, okay, so we called their bluff. And we said, okay, if you guys are that concerned about it, help us fix the signature verification stuff. And so they made this huge stink about it. And we made sure that we kept actual signature verification law on the books, curing ballots in real time, and actual voter ID at the polls. And so we got a supermajority in the House, a supermajority in the Senate. That means it's an emergency clause. Hobbs signs the bill on Friday. It becomes immediate law right away. So that's a huge election integrity win. I didn't talk a lot about it on X or in public and stuff like that recently because I wanted this to fly under the radar. And thankfully, all of us felt the same way. And so that's a pretty big election integrity win that nobody saw coming under a Democrat governor because we held the line and we pushed the envelope a little bit. And that's what you get.
So what were the counter arguments? Why, like, all these things don't sound like they're like particularly Republican or like conservative. They sound to me like something that anybody who wants to have secure, fair, free elections would advocate for. So then what is the counter argument? What do they say?
Their initial thing was the governor did not want the curing thing in there. And that kind of raised red flags for me that I knew we were on the right path because they have those outside organizations, those NGOs that can go and cure ballots faster than the Republicans can because they have the organizational, foundation for that, the infrastructure. We don't. And so I knew we were over the target on that. Their argument was, it might end up disenfranchising more voters because there's not going to be enough time for people to cure the ballots that are already there. And I'm like, that's bullcrap, guys, because the counties always came to us and said, well, we don't have enough time or we don't have the manpower to cure ballots in real time. Like, that's fine. We'll just have the Republican Party do it. You can have the Democrat Party do it. And so when you put them on record on stuff like that, then they're like, oh, crap, I think you're right. They'll look really stupid if they're like, oh, we can cure ballots in real time. You can't. The other thing was they didn't want us to be able to show ID at the polls for dropping off your ballot. You already have to show ID to vote in person in Arizona. But for mail-in ballots, you don't have to do it. But now you're going to have to show your ID to vote to drop off your mail-in ballot. They obviously said that's voter suppression, that you have to show your ID. It's going to target Black people. It's going to target Hispanics. It's going to target minorities.
Same old story every single time.
Every time, dude.
It's all
every
the Black
freaking
people.
Time. And so we put them in a corner on this. We said, why wouldn't you want? This is actual common sense stuff. And because the governor and Maricopa County and the liberals made such a stink about the recount process and how it's going to screw up being able to send overseas voters, the Yuba Cava voters, their ballots, we put them in a corner. And we said, okay, we'll do it with you. We'll play ball. But here's where you need to come meet us at the table. And because they manufactured this crisis, we're going to get significant wins out of it. And so if they look dumb, we look smart.
That's
awesome. My gosh. The voter ID thing or the ID thing is absolutely ridiculous. However, I could probably see Democrats ordering fake IDs like we did in high school from China. I could see that becoming an issue. Oh my gosh. Well, congratulations, man. That sounds unbelievable. That sounds like a huge win.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, our elections this next time around, I'm pretty confident will be much more secure than they were in 2020 and 2022, specifically because we've established a chain of custody now. We know where these ballots are coming from, and they have to have ID to be dropped off.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about that is that other states, like let's say things go super well, there's no hangups, they try all their tricks and it doesn't work. Other states can then adopt the stuff that you've done and say, well, look, it worked there, point to you as precedent and say, that's what we have to do it here. And a governor would be more hard pressed even then to say no against things that are clearly already working and have worked.
Yeah, I mean, look, we got it done with a Republican legislature and a Democrat governor. You know, what is the excuse for these Republican governors and these Republican legislatures to do, you know, much more than what we can do? Wisconsin's a perfect example. They have a almost a super majority. I thought that Wisconsin had a super majority, but they're only a couple votes shy of a super majority in Wisconsin with a Democrat governor. Why are you guys sitting on your hands? Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia. Those are the three states that matters the most. Same thing with Georgia. They can do way more to shore up their elections than we could in Arizona. If Arizona can do it, there's no reason why these other states can't.
And you're also involved in Wisconsin, Georgia, with Turning Point Action, right? You're hiring a ton of ballot chasers and field organizers in really specific counties and precincts and cities, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so right now I'm the senior director at Turning Point Action now, overseeing the Chase the Vote initiative. And really, when you look at the electoral map to win the White House, if you're a Republican, Florida's likely to go Republican. North Carolina's going to go Republican. Ohio will too. The three states that you actually have to secure to win 270, it's Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia. In 2022, Kari Lake only lost by 14,000 votes to 17,000 votes to Katie Hobbs. If we would have had ballot chasers, people who go after Republican voters that are low propensity in every precinct in Arizona, if every precinct in Arizona got 10 more Republicans to vote, Kari Lake is your governor. You know, that's where
only 10 votes per precinct.
10 more Republican votes per precinct. Kari Lake wins. Kari Lake wins. And so the significance of that is Mark Kelly, our astronaut, freaking senator from Arizona, his group, Mission for Arizona, his 501c4, they hired close. We got the information on this. Mission for Arizona hired close to 1,200 people in Arizona to chase low propensity Democrat votes. That's why there is such a big spread between him and Blake Masters, where all they did with that 100,000 something vote spread, all they did was go find low propensity Democrats and get them to fill out their ballot for Mark Kelly and Katie Hobbs. So Mark Kelly pulled Katie Hobbs' ass across the finish line with ballot chasing, with those 14,000 something votes, and Mark Kelly's 100,000 votes. Same exact thing can be applied in Wisconsin. Tim Michels, who was running for governor there, he lost by another 97,000 votes to the Democrat Tony Evers that was running there, simply because of ballot chasing. They had upwards to 800 ballot chasers in Wisconsin going after low propensity Democrats and pulling him across the finish line to get him elected. Ron Johnson wins by a significant amount because he also, I don't know if he was ballot chasing, but they were also targeting low propensity. And you can argue because he's a senior senator from that state, he has a lot of clout, he can get elected. But Tim Michels loses by 90,000 something votes simply because of ballot chasing. The votes are there. This is all simple math. And so the reason why we're doing this chase the vote thing is you've probably heard about, from these consultants, it's all about candidate quality. If we just nominated more moderate, squishy, America last people, George Bush types, we're going to win elections again. When that couldn't be further from the truth. I have said before, and I will say it again, it does not matter if it was Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, or Ronald freaking Reagan on the ballot in 2024. We will lose these battleground states if we do not ballot chase in Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia. It's that simple. They elected Joe Biden doing it. They elected John Fetterman doing it. They elected all of these Democrats. You've noticed the Democrats are not pivoting to the middle towards these general elections. They're getting further and further left. Why? Because it's a simple game of math. They know where the votes are. They know where these low propensity Democrat votes are, where they only care about maybe one issue. Low propensity Democrat, somebody from Mark Kelly's shows up at his door. Do you hate Donald Trump? Yeah, I hate Donald Trump. Great. Here, fill out this ballot for Joe Biden. Boom. They fill it out. They walk with him, go drop it off in the ballot box, or the mailbox. That's all by design. That's all a simple math game. That's all that it is. The plus side about this chase the vote operation in Arizona is we have more registered Republicans than they do Democrats. Same exact thing in Wisconsin. They have hit a ceiling. There's only so many votes that they can get. Independents are already going to break 50-50 one way or another. Democrats are already going to get a high propensity turnout from their low propensity votes. Republicans, we're getting our hard Republicans to vote, and we're trying to go after these independents and get them to vote for us, but we're losing an entire low-hanging fruit of voters out there. And so that's why Chase the Vote exists. That's exactly what we're trying to do in Arizona and Wisconsin.
Yeah, and I think the issue of the economy and the border are a really bad hindrance towards towards the Democrats right now, and could be that issue for low propensity of Republican voters who are just fed up with everything. Probably why they're not even voting, because they just hate everyone because things are so bad. I did want to ask though quickly, because clearly now you have really good insight to what they did in 2020, and you fixed a lot of those issues. Do you have, and I'm not going to ask you because I don't want anyone to hear, be like, oh, look, that's what they're doing. But have you guys sat down and said, what else could they do? Like, if we're chasing to catch up to where they were, what are they planning now that's even further from what they were doing before? And what, if there's any loopholes that they can, go into?
I think and I'll be honest with you, it's my concern, and what I think can be next is the DOJ stepping in to run the elections. It's the DOJ stepping in, coming into these states and being the ones to facilitate these elections. That's one of the reasons why they manufactured this crisis in Arizona was we're not going to be able to hold and facilitate these elections because we're not able to get the ballots out on time. We're not able to process these ballots in time. So the DOJ needs to come in here. So I think that's going to be their next step in some of these states. So they're going to want the DOJ to come in. But because the legislatures are all in disarray, they can't get anything done. The ballots are not being sent out. There's lawsuits going on. The DOJ comes in. We're going to facilitate your election. We're going to send out the ballots. We're going to be the ones to count it. I think that's the next move. That's what I'm seeing that's going to happen next, and why we try to get in front of it here in Arizona, because the worst thing possible could happen is the federal government coming into each state and now running your elections. Now we're done. Now we're totally done. Now we've got the federal government running everything between the DOJ, as corrupted as already is. Let's put these guys in charge of elections now. Let's start suing, the Turning Point Actions for, being involved in this. Let's start going after the candidates, talking about, election fraud, simple things like that. They're just going to use and this is why I think that they're freaking out, because we've been more vocal about the ballot chasing thing and they're trying to kick Trump off the ballot, and they're trying to get these candidates not to run, where they're trying to go after electors to not send your electors if you're, not the presumptive nominee. They're using the lawfare to win these elections. They're going to use the DOJ to come in and manage these elections now. If we can't get you off the ballot, we're going to find a way to do the tally. That's what I think is going to happen next if we're not playing offense on it.
That would be nuts. That would be one step closer to the authoritarian state that we're all just hoping never happens.
Right.
And I'm wondering about the constitutionality of it. Obviously, it seems very unconstitutional to do so, but it seems like they just don't really care either. So,
no, and they obviously have shown that they don't. And so, if you just give like one, slight of disapproval, or you screw something up, it's just giving the DOJ the opportunity to come in, because they're the federal government. They've set precedents. They can say you're violating people's civil rights, and so we have the obligation under United States Constitution or federal authority to come in here and run your elections, which is terrifying because they will never leave.
Yeah. That's one thing they'd like to do. Once they get power, they don't like to give it up. That's for sure.
No, that's one thing I've learned in the legislature. Once it becomes a government program, it never goes away. That's usually why I'm always a no vote on continuing agencies. I'm like, no, we got to renew it every 8 years. I'm like, great, I'm a no vote. I'm a no vote.
Jeez. Yeah, there's this really, really bad Proposition 1 here in California that would, I forget how many billions of dollars it is. They want to change mental illness to behavioral something else, and it grants all this money. It's just such a communistic type of proposition. I'm reading it, and the bill is probably like 30 pages.
Yeah.
Just for the proposition, and I'm like, no one's gonna read this. It's horrible what they've done to the state, and they're not stopping. They want more money to do more social programs on top of the already exorbitant amount of money they spent with zero results. And I don't know if you've heard, but apparently now we went from being in a budget surplus of like $100 billion or something ridiculous now to a deficit, all because everyone's just leaving, and California can't collect taxes anymore.
Yeah, it's a problem for all these blue states. They're picking up and leaving because nobody can afford to live there anymore. And that's why you get like this influx of a lot of people moving to Florida and Texas and Arizona. And that's kind of been one of the reasons too. It's like the influx of people moving from California to Arizona. Are they bringing their voting habits? Yeah, some of them are. Is it making that much of a significant impact? I don't know. I think it kind of is, because you're starting to see it in a lot of these states that are red become much more competitive. And there's a larger conversation about that. So you get this really bad policy like you're talking about in California, and people will vote and keep that stuff there, right? but they also have that massive infrastructure, that Democrat machine in California. They're like, we don't care if you pick up and leave or not. This is how we're going to run the state. We have the machine here to get this proposition across the finish line. We have the supermajority legislature. We have a Democrat governor. Go ahead, leave. But eventually it's like whatever you want to call it, a star. It's going to collapse in on itself. Mm-hmm. It's just not sustainable. And who's going to be there to pick up all the pieces? Definitely not the Republican voters. They're all gone. Mm-hmm. That's the federal government to bail them out.
That's the theory I've been hearing from people. So like I live in Illinois. I have friends that live over in California. And what I hear from people is they say they're both racing to hit bankruptcy so that because they know the federal government will bail one of them out and the other one is going to be left to fend for themselves. And so whichever one hits bankruptcy first, that's the one that's going to actually get the help. And so I really don't know if it'll be, I mean, my money's probably on California, but being in Illinois, I don't know. We seem to make a lot of wrong turns as well. You know, there's a lot of successes and a lot of failures we've talked about in this, Austin, and a lot of it has to do with a lot of the work you've done in your state Senate and a lot of that other people have done in their own governments that they've been elected to. But what can the average person do? The average person who's watching this, who's not necessarily elected to anything, might go to a meeting here or there, is obviously in tune enough to be watching political content on the internet. But what can the average person do to help out with shifting America's culture, with ballot chasing, everything like that?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, at least for somebody that's right of center or who's not maybe they're apolitical, but they are upset to see the way the country's going, right? And they I want to do something. Charlie Kirk always has this joke where he's like, Charlie, I've done it. They come up to Charlie like, I've done everything. I bought the pillow. I refinanced my home. Did all that stuff that's on Fox News to save the country. What's happening? Like, well, that's not how you save the country. One of the most, my background in the last couple of years is I was very involved in the grassroots for the party here in Arizona. And everybody who's a registered Republican is probably, even I know the party sucks, but the parties are a vehicle to get your ideas and your policies across the finish line. And unless you've got a stake in the party, you really have no say at all. Gentry knows this. We talk about it all the time at Turning Point Action. And I know you do, Kev, is being a precinct committeeman or central committeeman, whatever the nomenclature is for your state, the lowest elected office.
All good. We'll get him back.
I think it's because we've been having storms here in Arizona, so everything's going in and out. But
no worries. You said lowest elected office, and so
being in the lowest elected office in the community you represent. That's being a precinct committee of representation.
You froze again. Sorry.
That's all right. I think it's the weather going in and out right now with the Wi-Fi. But being a precinct committeeman, that's the lowest office closest to the people. Right? Like when you're a precinct committeeman and you're somebody who has skin in the game, going and voting on like who leads your legislative district, your county party, who eventually elects your state party chair, who sends those people to represent you at the RNC. I will tell you, if you're somebody like, I'm so pissed off at my elected official, I can't get a hold of them. I just need to be able to have a conversation with them and figure out what's going on. I pick up the phone when one of my precinct committeemen calls me in my legislative district. Why? Because they're more in touch with the grassroots. They have more of a say. They know more people. They can sway public opinion. That's the whole thing about this election integrity stuff we got done. None of this would have gotten done if the precinct committeemen hadn't been organized and vocal to us to get this stuff done. And so if you're somebody who's concerned about the future, the direction of the country, the state that you live in, your community, your county, your city, you have to be a precinct committeeman. It's like the absolute first step, getting involved at that level, having some skin in the game. I always say, like, you're not actually in the Republican Party unless you're a precinct committeeman. You have to take that step. You've got to be like, I think what's killing our country right now, guys, is like our grandparents and before that, they built these communities. Why? Because they understood that you had to have some input. You had to put some skin in the game. You had to be involved in the PTA. You had to be involved in the school board. You had to be involved somehow, some way with some organizations that impact the community. Because when you don't, the bad actors start to show up. Bad things happen when good men aren't around. I don't remember what that whole saying is like, but when you're not involved at a very local level and everything happens around your community, that's why I think you're seeing such pushback against a lot of these school boards of what people are being taught in school, is because a lot of us have been absent during this time. And you have the worst of the worst. The power always attracts the worst people. And when you're not around to correct that, then the country's going to go to crap. And that's why you got to be a precinct committeeman. You've got to be involved in your school board. You got to be registered to vote. And then, like, if you're a young male like us, you got to find a woman. None of this is going to matter if you don't get married and if you don't have kids. We got to reproduce. We got to build our army. We're already ahead of the left on this because they're not having sex with the opposite sex anymore. So they're not going to be making any children. So we're good there. We got to play the long game.
Absolutely. Be the sheepdog in the world of wolves and sheep. Absolutely.
We gotta coin that phrase for you. Well, Austin, it has been a pleasure having you on the show. How can people find you? How can people find out more about what you guys are doing?
Well, I appreciate you guys for having me on. I'd like to be back anytime you want me. I definitely like this vibe. This is cool. You can follow me on X at AZAustinSmith. Same thing on Instagram at AZAustinSmith. All of it's the same. Pretty easy to follow. Or you can go to austinforarizona.com. That's my campaign website. Learn out more there. If you would feel so inclined, donate to my re-election campaign, because I don't carry special interest for lobbyists, so I don't get a lot of lobbyist checks. I don't carry a lot of water for them, so I have to raise my own money. But
absolutely.
Well, that's awesome. Everybody that's awesome. who is listening, go follow Austin, and if you feel inclined, go donate to his campaign. But feel
inclined. Feel very inclined.
Feel very inclined. The future of Arizona, and Arizona is a swing state, so potentially the future of America relies on you donating to Austin Smith's campaign. So
not much pressure on it.
No pressure. No pressure. But if you're listening, it's a big deal.
You can donate $5 or you can donate $5,400. Whatever's on your heart.
Or you can do the Act Blue thing and just do a whole bunch of little donations. Yeah. No, we're not advocating for fraud there.
No fraud. But thank you everybody for watching. Thank you, Austin. And subscribe to Breakaway_USA. Follow us on all socials. Follow Speechless with Kev on YouTube and Instagram, Fabian Lux on Instagram and Twitter, and Gentry Jeevers on Instagram, and Austin Smith.
All right. See you guys.
Okay, we'll have to